Can you imagine that in the last return of a critical career, your own teammate denies you the step? And that generates an internal war in Ferrari? Well, that just happened, and what seemed like a simple order of poorly executed equipment is now an emotional bomb that threatens to fracture the entire Maranello structure. Just 10 laps were missing for the end. Charles Leclerc rolled in front of Lewis Hamilton, both in the fight for smaller points positions, P8 and P9. However, Ferrari had a solid argument. Hamilton came with new average tires, faster and with a better performance in that stretch of the race. Leclerc, with more used rubber, had to let the British pass so that he tried to attack Liam Lawson, who was just ahead. The logic was clear. Rather than fighting each other, the priority was to maximize the points of the team. So far, everything made sense. What was not expected was that the plan, executed thousands of times by other teams without major consequences, was going to be transformed into the emotional turning point of the Ferrari season. Because yes, Hamilton advanced to Leclerc. But the problem came later. Hamilton, despite having the free path and the fastest compound, failed to advance a single car. Lawson resisted, and the difference was never shortened effectively. What had been projected as a strategic attack became a sterile effort that also destabilized the internal order of the team. And then the key moment came, the last round. Riccardo Adami, a career engineer from Leclerc, transmitted a direct message to Hamilton. Charles is 2.5 behind you. It's the last round. Let him pass. A simple message, but was late. Too late. At that time, Hamilton was already launched, a few meters from the main line. What came later was a strange and tense scene. Hamilton raised his foot from the accelerator, reduced his speed notoriously, moving from more than 340 km per hour at only 184 km per hour. A desperate maneuver, a last-minute attempt to comply with the order, but it was useless. Leclerc came behind, also thoroughly, and although he recovered part of the lost terrain, he crossed the goal 0.464 seconds behind his partner. Hamilton stayed with the 8 square, Leclerc with the novena. And in the process, Ferrari lost not only one more point in the table, but something much more valuable, the internal balance between its pilots. Leclerc's reaction was immediate. It was not necessary to scream. His voice on the radio sounded calm but sharp like a knife. A tone that not only expressed discomfort for losing a position, but also allowed to glimpse an accumulation of disappointments that had not been resolved. A tone that said, this was not a punctual mistake. This was the drop that overwhelmed the glass. Because if observed with magnifying glass, this episode is not an isolated accident. Since the beginning of the season, Hamilton has been trying to adapt to a completely new environment, and Leclerc, who knows the team as the palm of his hand, has been the natural reference within the garage. But that dynamic is changing. And what happened in Baku marks a very clear line. Hamilton acted by instinct and Ferrari once again reacted late, without the necessary clarity required by a team that aspires to the title. The most dramatic was not the loss of a point. It was the sign that was sent to the entire paddock. Ferrari, in its attempt to control 2 lions in a single cage, is beginning to lose control. And in Formula 1, when the costume control is lost, much more than a race is lost. Ferrari tension did not explode in a curve or an aggressive maneuver. He did it on the most intimate and revealing channel that has a Formula 1 team, the radio. And sometimes an accident is not necessary to undress a conflict. Just listen to the tone of voice. And in Baku, Charles Leclerc's tone said more than any official statement or post-carrier interview. Once the finish line crossed, what left the Monegasco helmet was not an open claim, nor a frustration tantrum. It was a short, measured phrase, almost resigned, but loaded with a silent poison. Sarcastic, ironic, and above all, deeply disappointed. Leclerc did not lose control, which caused his message to resonate even more. He was not just angry to lose a position, it was a way of saying, they failed me again. That nuance was captured by the whole paddock. It was not an emotional explosion, it was a content reproach, addressed both to his partner and especially to whom they had to prevent this from happening. His own engineer's wall. And that is the most serious. Because if there is something that a Ferrari pilot cannot afford above all with the history and loyalty of Leclerc is to lose faith in the structure of the team. The radio not only exposed the lack of coordination, he presented the trusted crack. He explained that in key moments, Ferrari continues to fail where he should highlight. In operational management, in the clarity of orders, in sports leadership. Meanwhile, on the other side of the garage, Hamilton did what he should do. Or at least that seemed. He apologized publicly, bluntly. He accepted that the message was late. He admitted that it was a mistake of judgment to try to return the position to such high speed, at a point in the circuit where the maneuver was already impossible. His attempt to stop was clumsy, yes, but genuine. The British veteran was vulnerable. He acknowledged that, although he thought he could solve the situation with a simple foot lifting, he was wrong. 4 tenths were enough to light a drama that now threatens to change Ferrari's narrative for the rest of the year. But even in his apology, there was a worrying signal. Because Hamilton explained that, despite knowing that the chances of advancing Lawson were minimal 0.0001%, according to their own words, he decided to continue pushing. And that, although noble in the competitive spirit, reveals that the pilot and the team were not completely aligned. Ferrari had opted for a collective plan, and Hamilton, by instinct, acted as a lone wolf. As a champion with an attack mentality would do, but not necessarily as a teammate in a structure where each point counts for the World Cup of Builders. It is here where short circuit occurs. Because while both pilots acted according to their criteria, what lacked was directed from above. It lacked anticipation, leadership, clarity. A team like Ferrari cannot send a team order in the last lap and wait for it to run without margin or context. Not with 2 pilots of this caliber. Not in a championship where each error counts double. The most worrying thing is that this situation not only affected the relationship between Leclerc and Hamilton, it affected the emotional core of the team. Charles's radio was not just any complaint. It was a warning. A sign that if this is repeated, it will not be just an internal problem. It will be a public crisis. And when that happens in Ferrari, the ghosts of the past always find a way to return. What happened in Baku has left Ferrari not only with fewer points than expected, but with an open internal wound that goes far beyond sports. Because when we talk about Ferrari, we are not talking only about a Formula One. We talk about an institution full of history, media pressure, internal policy, and a worldly demanding fans. In this context, which seems a simple execution error becomes a governance crack. And that crack now has a name and surname: Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc. From the moment Ferrari signed Hamilton, many knew that the internal balance would be tensioning. Not for lack of respect among the pilots, but because Ferrari became the only team of the grid with 2 natural leaders, with trajectories that claim absolute prominence. Leclerc, the chosen one of Maranello, the pilot who has given his face in the darkest moments of the Scuderia. And Hamilton, the 7-time world champion, the living legend that came with the promise of returning Ferrari the lost glory. Until now, Ferrari had managed to maintain a diplomatic balance, at least for the public. But what happened in Azerbaijan ends that fiction. Because it is not simply a dispute for a race position. This is who has control within the team. Who is the number 1 pilot? Who makes decisions when individual interests collide with those of the whole? And above all, who responds for the operational management errors that continue to occur after a career? Frédéric Vasseur, team director, is now at the center of a storm that could define its legacy. If it does not act firmly, it runs the risk of repeating the story of Mattia Binotto, whose inability to impose hierarchy among its pilots resulted in a loss of total authority. In 2024, Ferrari was runner-up in the world. He achieved 5 victories and showed that he had recovered part of his competitiveness. But it also made it clear that the margin of error is minimal. And in 2025, with Red Bull fragmented and McLaren leading, Ferrari has the opportunity to capitalize on foreign chaos. Only if it stays united. And the most alarming thing is that Ferrari, as an organization, has not given a clear signal. There has been no blunt statement. There has been no public review of the incident. The only thing that has been heard have been apologies from Hamilton and the silent disappointment of Leclerc. The team has opted for the strategy of silence, as if ignoring the conflict made it disappear. But in Formula One, silence is usually the first symptom of institutional collapse. So now, more than ever, Ferrari faces a crossroads. Or impose order from above, establishing clear roles, effective communication processes, and a coherent sports strategy. Or will allow the talent of its pilots to become an internal chaos source. And when chaos is installed in Maranello, there is no aerodynamic or simulator development that corrects it. In summary, the Leclerc-Hamilton conflict is not a simple episode of friction. It is a thermometer. A clear indicator that Ferrari, if he does not take drastic measures, could waste the best opportunity he has had in years to return to the top. Because it is not enough to have 2 world-class pilots. You have to know how to manage them. Talent into results must be converted. And above all, we must prevent human errors from becoming custom. And that leaves us with an inevitable question, which should not be answered with statistics or technical analysis. A question that appeals to the depths of those who follow this sport with passion. What side are you? Hamilton's competitive instinct, who doesn't want to give up or when everything seems lost? Or Leclerc's commitment, which continues to believe that the team must be above any individual ego? Leave it in the comments.